Adelaida Kincaid slammed the heavy barn door shut against the howling prairie wind. "We have to leave, or we starve right here in the dirt," she said, her voice cracking. Her younger brother, Toby, looked up from the empty grain sack, his eyes wide and hollow in the lantern light. Adelaida grabbed her coat, the leather worn thin at the elbows, and cinched it tight, ignoring the gnawing hunger in her own belly to focus on the rage that kept her warm. She checked the cylinder of her father's old Colt Navy revolver, seeing only 2 bullets resting in the chambers, a grim reminder of how little they had left to fight the world with. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you." She shoved the gun into her waistband and turned back to the boy, whose coughing fit had just subsided into a wheezing rattle. "Stay here, Toby," she commanded, softening her tone only slightly as she brushed a stray lock of hair from his feverish forehead. "Bar the door behind me and don't open it for anyone unless you hear my voice. You hear me? Not for the sheriff, not for the banker, and certainly not for any drifter passing through. Addie, don't go to him," Toby whispered, clutching her sleeve with a grip surprisingly strong for his frail state. "They say Silas Thorne shoots trespassers before he even asks their business. They say a lot of things," Addie replied, pulling away gently but firmly. "But Silas Thorne has a wagon that can make the pass, and he's the only soul in this godforsaken valley who owes Pa a favor, even if he won't admit it." She stepped out into the biting wind, the dust of the dry season stinging her cheeks like 1,000 needles. The sun was beginning to dip below the jagged horizon of the Dragoon Mountains, casting long bloody shadows across the scrubland that she had tried so desperately to tame. The Kincaid Ranch, the Double K, was nothing more than a patch of dust and dying dreams now. The well dry and the cattle sold off one by one just to buy flour and medicine. But she wouldn't let the land take Toby. She would burn the whole territory down before she let that happen. The walk to the Thorne property was 5 miles of rough, broken ground, but Addie marched it with the rhythm of a soldier. Every step was a battle against the exhaustion that threatened to pull her down into the sagebrush. She thought of her father, buried on the hill for 3 years now, and the promise she had made him to hold the land. But promises didn't fill bellies, and they didn't cure the lung fever that was slowly draining the life out of her brother. She needed the doctor in Silver Creek, and that was 20 miles away through bandit country. Silas Thorne's ranch was different. It was a fortress of solitude, nestled against the base of a canyon wall where the water still ran deep underground. As she approached the main house, she saw the silhouette of a man on the porch, motionless as a statue carved from granite. He was smoking a cheroot, the glowing ember the only sign of life in the deepening twilight. Addie didn't slow down. She marched right up to the steps, the wood creaking under her worn boots. "I need a ride," she announced, her voice cutting through the silence of the evening. Silas Thorne didn't move. He leaned against the porch post, his face obscured by the shadow of his hat. He was a mountain of a man, broad-shouldered and scarred, with a reputation that was half myth and half nightmare. They said he had killed men in Abilene, that he had ridden with the Rangers, that he had no heart left to break. "You're trespassing, Kincaid," Silas said finally, his voice a low rumble like distant thunder. "And you're loud. I don't care about your property lines, Silas," Addie snapped, her hand hovering near the Colt at her waist, not as a threat, but as a reflex. "Toby is sick. The fever's got him bad. I can't get him to Silver Creek on the Mare. She's gone lame. I need your wagon, and I need you to drive it." Silas took a slow drag from his cheroot and flicked the ash onto the porch boards. He stepped forward, the fading light revealing a face etched with hard lines and eyes the color of cold steel. "And why would I do that? Your daddy and I weren't exactly friends at the end. Because you're the only one who can," Addie said, stepping up onto the first stair, meeting his gaze without flinching. "And because I'm not asking for charity. I'm offering a trade." Silas raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement or perhaps curiosity crossing his stoic features. You got nothing left to trade, girl. I've seen your herd. You're down to bone and hide. I have the deed to the water rights on the North Acre, Addie lied. She didn't have the deed. The bank held it. But Silas didn't know that, and desperation made for a convincing performance. You've wanted access to that creek bed for 10 years. Get us to town. Get the doctor for Toby, and I'll sign the easement over to you. Silas studied her for a long moment, his gaze dissecting her, looking for the lie. Addie held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knew he could see the fear in her eyes, but she prayed he could also see the resolve. She was a cornered animal, and cornered animals were dangerous. Get in the barn, Silas grunted, turning his back on her and walking toward the door. I'll hitch the mules. Addie let out a breath she didn't know she was holding, her knees almost buckling with relief. Thank you, she whispered, though she knew he wouldn't appreciate the sentiment. Don't thank me, he called back over his shoulder. You just sold your birthright for a ride to town. That ain't smart business. It's not business, she muttered to herself as she followed him. It's survival. The journey back to the Kincaid ranch to collect Toby was silent. Silas drove the wagon with an effortless competence, his large hands guiding the mules over the rutted track as if he knew every stone and pothole by name. Addie sat beside him, rigid, her eyes scanning the horizon. The sun had fully set, and the moon was rising, painting the desert in shades of silver and charcoal. When they arrived, Addie rushed inside and bundled Toby in every blanket they owned. He was burning up, his skin dry and papery. Silas stood in the doorway, filling the frame, watching as she struggled to lift the boy. Move, Silas said, stepping in. He scooped Toby up as easily as if the boy were a sack of feathers. Toby groaned, his head lolling against Silas's chest. Easy, son, Silas rumbled, his voice surprisingly gentle. We're going for a ride. They settled Toby in the back of the wagon on a bed of straw and quilts. Addie climbed up to the bench seat, grabbing the Winchester from where she had stashed it. You expecting trouble? Silas asked, eyeing the rifle. It's the West, Silas, Addie replied, checking the lever action. Trouble finds you whether you expect it or not. Silas cracked the reins, and the wagon lurched forward. Silver Creek is a 4-hour ride in the dark. Keep your eyes sharp. The McCray boys have been running cattle through the pass, and they don't take kindly to interruptions. The McCray brothers. Addie felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. They were land sharks, ruthless men who had been trying to squeeze the smaller ranchers out of the valley for years. If they caught Silas Thorne helping the Kincaid, they wouldn't hesitate to start a war. The first hour passed in a tense quiet. The only sounds were the rhythmic clop of the mules' hooves, the creak of the wagon wheels, and Toby's ragged breathing from the back. Addie stared at the darkness, her mind racing. She thought about the lies she had told, the debts she couldn't pay, and the sheer fragility of their existence. You got a plan for when we get there? Silas asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Find Doc Miller, Addie said. Get medicine. Pray. Prayer's good, Silas said dryly. Cash is better. Doc Miller don't work for free. I have something, Addie said, her hand going to the locket beneath her shirt. It was her mother's, the last piece of jewelry she owned. Silas glanced at her, his eyes catching the glint of the silver chain. He didn't say anything, but his jaw tightened. Why do you stay? He asked after a while. This land is dead, Addie. Your pa, rest his soul, he was too stubborn to see it. But you're smart. You could go east, get a job in a city, live a life where you don't have to sleep with a gun under your pillow. This is my home, Addie said fiercely. It's all we have. If I leave, everything Pa worked for, everything he died for, it just disappears. I won't let the desert swallow us whole. The desert swallows everyone eventually, Silas said, his voice devoid of malice, stating it like a simple fact of nature. It don't care about your legacy. Maybe, Addie said, looking at his profile. But it hasn't swallowed you. Silas laughed, a short, harsh bark. I'm already swallowed, girl. I'm just too mean to digest. They reached the entrance to the canyon pass, a narrow throat of rock where the moonlight barely reached the ground. This was the choke point. If anyone was waiting for them, this is where they would be. Silas slowed the mules to a walk. Quiet now, he whispered. Keep that rifle low. Addie's heart pounded in her ears. She scanned the ridges above them, looking for the telltale glint of metal or the silhouette of a rider. The canyon walls loomed high and oppressive, closing them in. Suddenly, a rock clattered down from the cliff face to their left. Silas pulled the reins, halting the wagon instantly. His hand dropped to the heavy peacemaker on his hip. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice echoing off the stone walls. Silence answered him. Then, the sound of a horse blowing air, and the creak of saddle leather. 3 riders emerged from the shadows ahead, blocking the trail. Even in the gloom, Addie recognized the lead horse, a massive roan with a white blaze. It belonged to Unnatural Calamity, Caleb McCray. "Well now," Caleb drawled, his voice thick with mock politeness. "If it ain't the hermit of the valley, coming down from his mountain. And look who he's got with him. Little Miss Kincaid." Addie raised the Winchester, aiming it squarely at Caleb's chest. "Move aside, Caleb. We have a sick boy in the back." Caleb chuckled, and the 2 men flanking him shifted their horses. "Sick, is he? That's a shame. But see, this here is a toll road tonight. My brothers and I were moving a herd through in the morning, and we can't have wagons running up the trail. This is a public road," Silas said, his voice dangerously calm. "Laws change when the sun goes down, Thorne," Caleb sneered. "You know that better than anyone. Turn the wagon around. Go back to your hole." "We're not turning around," Addie said, cocking the hammer of the rifle. The metallic click was loud in the canyon. Caleb's smile vanished. "You pull that trigger, darlin', and none of you leave this canyon." "Let them pass, Caleb," Silas said. "The boy is dying. Everybody dies," Caleb spat. "Turn around, or we drop the mules." Addie saw Silas's hand tense on the reins. She knew what he was calculating: the distance, the speed, the odds. 3 against 2, and she had the only rifle ready. But if they shot the mules, they were stranded miles from help. Toby wouldn't last the night. "Silas," Addie whispered. "Hold on," Silas murmured back. "I said turn it around." Caleb shouted, his hand going to his holster. "Hiya!" Silas roared, slapping the reins hard. The mules surged forward, not turning, but charging straight at the riders. The sudden movement startled Caleb's roan, causing it to rear. Addie didn't think. She fired. The shot went wide, hitting the dirt near the horse's hooves, but the noise was deafening in the enclosed space. Chaos erupted. The wagon careened forward, bouncing violently over the rocks. Addie nearly lost her grip on the rifle as she grabbed the bench to steady herself. Gunfire erupted from the riders' flashes of orange in the dark. A bullet splintered the wood of the wagon seat, inches from Addie's hip. "Get down!" Silas yelled, urging the mules into a gallop. Addie dropped into the footwell, turning to check on Toby. He was crying out in delirium, tossed by the rough motion. "Keep them moving, Silas!" She screamed, popping back up to fire another shot blindly behind them. They smashed through the blockade, the heavy wagon wheels clipping one of the McCray horses. The rider went down with a shout, but Caleb and the other man wheeled around, spurring their mounts in pursuit. "They're coming," Addie yelled. "I know." Silas gritted his teeth, fighting the heavy wagon around a sharp bend. The canyon floor was treacherous here, full of loose shale and washouts. They were picking up speed, too much speed for a wagon in the dark. The wind whipped Addie's hair across her face, blinding her. Behind them, the hoofbeats were getting louder. Caleb was closing the gap. "Take the reins," Silas ordered, shoving the leather straps into her hands. "What? Take them." "Keep us on the trail." Before Addie could argue, Silas stood up on the moving wagon. He turned, drawing his peacemaker with a fluid motion that spoke of years of practice. He waited, balancing on the swaying deck like a sailor in a storm. Bang, bang. Silas fired 2 shots in rapid succession. Behind them, a horse screamed, and a rider tumbled into the dust. Caleb swerved, pulling back, realizing the prey had teeth. "Drive, Addie, don't stop." Silas roared, dropping back into the seat and taking the reins back from her freezing hands. They thundered out of the canyon mouth and onto the open scrubland, leaving the echoes of the gunfight behind them. But the danger wasn't over. The wagon hit a deep rut, slamming down with a bone-jarring crack. The rear left corner sagged, the wood groaning in protest. "The wheel!" Addie shouted. "The axle is cracked." Silas cursed, slowing the mules to a trot, then a walk. He leaned over the side. "It's holding, but barely. If we run them again, it snaps and we flip." "We can't stop," Addie said, panic rising in her throat. "Caleb will regroup. He'll come after us." "We're miles from town still," Silas said, his face grim. He looked at Toby, then at Addie. "We have to limp it in." "But if they catch us on the flats ... We fight," Addie said. "No," Silas looked at her, his expression unreadable. "If they catch us on the flats, you run. You take the boy and you run into the brush." "I'm not leaving you," Addie said, surprised by the conviction in her own voice. Silas looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time that night. "You made a promise to your pa, Addie. Keep it." They drove on in tense silence, the broken wheel groaning with every revolution, a ticking clock counting down the miles. The lights of Silver Creek were a faint glow on the horizon, a beacon of hope that felt impossibly far away. Addie sat back, her adrenaline fading into a cold dread. She watched the road behind them, expecting to see the shadows detach themselves from the night at any moment. She looked at Silas, his profile sharp against the stars. He had saved them back there. He had put himself between her and a bullet. "Why, Silas?" she asked softly. "Why did you really agree to take us?" "It wasn't for the water rights." Silas was silent for a long time. The town lights grew slightly brighter. "Your father," Silas said, his voice rough. "Before he died, he came to me. He asked me to look out for you if things got bad. I told him no. I told him I was done looking out for people." Addie stared at him. "You told him no?" "I did," Silas nodded. "And he told me I was a damn fool who was going to die alone." He was right about the first part. He turned to look at her, and for a second, the hard mask slipped. "I ain't doing this for the water, Addie. I'm doing it because ... Because he was the only man in this valley who never looked at me like I was a monster." Addie felt a lump in her throat. She reached out, her hand hovering over his arm, unsure. But before she could touch him, the wagon lurched violently to the left. The groan of the wood turned into a snap that sounded like a gunshot. The world tilted. "Hold on!" Silas shouted, throwing his arm across her chest to pin her to the seat. The rear wheel shattered. The wagon corner slammed into the dirt, dragging through the gravel. The mules panicked, rearing and twisting in their harness. The wagon spun, sliding sideways, tipping dangerously close to the edge of a steep, dry wash. They ground to a halt in a cloud of dust, the wagon listing at a 45-degree angle. "Toby!" Addie scrambled back, fighting gravity. The boy was slid against the sideboards, groaning but conscious. "Addie?" "I'm here," she soothed, checking him for broken bones. "We're okay. We're sitting ducks," Silas announced, jumping down and inspecting the damage. He kicked the broken axle. "It's done. She won't move another inch." Addie climbed down, her boots hitting the dirt. The silence of the desert rushed back in, heavy and threatening. They were 3 miles from town, walking distance for a healthy man. A death sentence for a sick child with bandits on his tail. "We walk," Silas said, unhitching the mules. "We put the boy on one of the mules. You ride the other. What about you?" Addie asked. I walked behind. Silas pulled his rifle from the scabbard under the seat. Cover the rear. Addie helped him lift Toby onto the lead mule, wrapping the boy in the quilts. Toby was barely lucid now, his heat radiating through the fabric. Can you take us to town? She asked, her voice small, repeating the question that had started this nightmare. Silas looked at her, the moonlight catching the scar on his cheek. He nodded slowly. Only if you promise to come back home. The words hung in the air, heavy with a meaning she couldn't quite parse. Was he telling her not to die? Or was he asking her to return to him? I promise, she whispered. They set off, a ragged procession moving through the sagebrush. Addie rode with Toby slumped against her back, feeling his shallow breaths. Silas walked 10 paces behind, his rifle cradled in his arm, his head swiveling constantly. They were a mile out when Addie heard it, a sound that made her blood freeze. The distant, rhythmic thud of hooves. Lots of them. She turned in the saddle. Silas? Silas stopped. He knelt down, putting his ear to the hard-packed earth. He stayed there for a long moment, then stood up, his face pale in the moonlight. Is it Caleb? Addie asked. No, Silas said, and the fear in his voice terrified her more than the gunfight had. Caleb rides with 3 men. Maybe 4. He looked at the horizon, where a cloud of dust was rising against the stars, moving fast. That's a posse, Silas said. Or a war party. For us? I don't know. Silas jacked around into the chamber of his rifle. But they're coming from the town side. Addie's heart stopped. If the threat was coming from town, and Caleb was behind them, they were trapped. Off the road, Silas ordered, grabbing the mule's bridle. Now, into the wash. They scrambled down the steep bank of the dry riverbed, the mule sliding and snorting. They huddled in the shadow of the cut bank, hidden from the road above. The sound of the riders grew louder, a thunderous rumble that shook the ground. Addie clamped her hand over Toby's mouth to stifle his coughing. Silas crouched beside her, his body tense as a coiled spring. Above them, on the road, the riders thundered past. Dozens of them. Addie caught flashes of them through the bushmen in long coats, Winchesters held high. They weren't bandits. They were something else. One rider pulled up, stopping right above their hiding spot. The horse paced nervously. Addie held her breath until her lungs burned. They ain't here, boss. The rider shouted to the group ahead. Find them. A voice roared back, a voice that sounded like gravel crunching under a boot. Burn the whole valley if you have to. I want the girl. Addie's eyes widened. She looked at Silas. He was staring at her, his expression shifting from protection to confusion. The girl? Silas mouthed. The riders galloped on, heading toward the Kincaid ranch. Toward the empty house. Silence returned to the wash, but it was different now. It was the silence of the hunter's pause. Addie, Silas whispered, his voice low and dangerous. Who are those men? I don't know, she stammered. They aren't McCray's men, Silas said, gripping her arm. That was the marshal's badge on that lead rider. But that wasn't the marshal. He pulled her closer, his eyes searching hers. What did you really do, Addie? Why is a death squad riding down a starving rancher's daughter? Addie opened her mouth to speak, to tell him she didn't know, that she was just a girl trying to save her brother, but then she remembered. The letter. The letter she had found in her father's desk the day he died. The letter she had sewn into the lining of her coat, right next to her heart. She had never read it. She had been too afraid. But she knew, with a sinking certainty, that whatever was in that letter was the reason the sky was falling on them tonight. I think, Addie whispered, the realization dawning on her like a cold sunrise. I think my father stole something. Or he knew something he wasn't supposed to. Silas swore softly. He looked at Toby, burning with fever, and then at the road where the riders had gone. We can't go to Silver Creek, Silas said. They'll be watching the doctor's house. Then where do we go? Addie asked, tears finally spilling over. He's dying, Silas. Silas looked at the endless dark desert stretching out to the south, to the badlands, to the territory where no law reached. "We go to the ghost town," Silas said grimly. "There's an old medicine woman there, Apache. If she's still alive, she can help." "That's 3 days' ride," Addie protested. "Through the devil's Anvil. It's the only chance we got," Silas said. He grabbed the mule's reins. "And you better pray she likes you, because those men, they aren't going to stop until they have your head in a sack." He looked at her one last time, his eyes hard but burning with a strange, fierce loyalty. "You asked for a ride to town," Silas said. "Looks like we're going to hell instead." He turned and began to lead the mule south, into the deep, unforgiving dark. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. The darkness of the Devil's Anvil was not simply an absence of light. It was a physical weight, pressing down on the lungs, heavy with the scent of sulfur and ancient dust. Silas walked with the steady, plodding rhythm of a man who had long ago forgotten how to hurry, yet they covered ground with punishing speed. Addie rode the mule, clutching Toby's fever-hot body against her chest, her eyes burning from the strain of peering into the abyss. Every shadow looked like a rider. Every snap of a dry twig sounded like the click of a hammer. They had been moving for 6 hours since escaping the ambush at the pass. The moon had abandoned them, slipping behind a bank of thick, low-hanging clouds that promised no rain, only stifling heat. "Drink," Silas's voice emerged from the dark, rough as tree bark. He passed back a canteen without stopping. Addie fumbled for it, her fingers stiff. She uncorked it and pressed it to Toby's cracked lips. "Toby, wake up." Just a sip. The boy didn't wake, but he swallowed reflexively, a whimper escaping his throat. Addie took a meager sip herself. The water was warm and tasted of tin, and handed it back to Silas. "How far?" she asked, her voice a whisper that seemed too loud in the vast emptiness. "Far enough that they won't find us tonight," Silas grunted. "Not far enough to stop moving." Addie looked at his back, a broad expanse of shadow moving ahead of the mule. He hadn't complained, hadn't slowed, hadn't shown a flicker of the exhaustion that was gnawing at her bones. He was an elemental force, something forged from the iron of the earth itself. "You said we're going to hell," Addie said, trying to keep her mind off the terrifying rasp of Toby's breathing. "Is that what you call the ghost town?" "San Perdido," Silas corrected. "Saint of the Lost. It used to be a silver boom town. Then the silver ran out, the wells dried up, and the fever took the rest. Now, only the ghosts live there." "And Nita, the Apache woman," Addie said. "You trust her?" Silas paused for a fraction of a second, adjusting the rifle on his shoulder. "She pulled a Comanche arrow out of my chest 10 years ago when no white doctor would touch me. I trust her to do what she says, whether she says she help us. That's another matter." They pushed on as the sky began to bruise with the purple light of dawn. The landscape revealed itself in grim slow motion, a tortured expanse of jagged badlands, hoodoos rising like skeletal fingers from the red dirt, and canyons that wound like scars across the face of the world. There was no vegetation here, only rock and silence. By noon, the sun was a hammer. The heat shimmering off the ground distorted the air, turning the horizon into a pool of liquid mercury. Toby had stopped shivering and gone limp, his breathing shallow and rapid. "We have to stop," Addie croaked, her own throat parched. "The mule needs rest. Toby needs shade." Silas scanned the terrain, his eyes narrowed to slits against the glare. He pointed to a cluster of boulders creating a sliver of shadow near the base of a cliff. "There. 2 hours. Then we move." They huddled in the shade, the stone radiating heat against their backs. Addie laid Toby out on the quilt, dampening a rag with the precious little water they had left to wipe his face. He looked so small, his features pinched with pain. Silas sat a few feet away, cleaning his Winchester with methodical care. He looked at Addie, his gaze lingering on the coat she still wore, despite the sweltering heat. "You're cooking in that leather," he observed. "Take it off." Addie shook her head, her hand instinctively going to the patch of lining over her heart. "I'm fine." Silas stopped wiping the barrel. He set the gun down and looked at her, really looked at her, with that piercing intensity that made her feel like he could see the secrets written on her bones. "The letter," he said. It wasn't a question. Addie froze. "What?" "The reason you're wearing a winter coat in a 100-degree desert. The reason a death squad is hunting us." "Show it to me." Addie hesitated. This piece of paper was the only thing she had left of her father, the only clue to the madness that had descended upon them. But looking at Silas, at the sweat staining his shirt, the dust in the lines of his face, the gun he kept ready to defend them, she realized she had no right to keep secrets anymore. He had bled for them. He deserved to know why. She reached into the lining, ripping the stitches with her fingernail. She pulled out the folded yellowed parchment. Her hands trembled as she handed it to him. Silas unfolded it, his thick fingers surprisingly delicate. He squinted at the handwriting, his lips moving silently as he read. "My dearest Adelaida, if you are reading this, then the land has finally taken me. I have tried to shield you and Toby from the sins of this valley, but the past has a way of unburying itself. Come back," she whispered, echoing his words from the ranch. "I intend to," he said. He turned and walked out into the night. Addie spent the next hour barricading the door and windows of the adobe hut. She positioned herself in the corner, the rifle across her lap, watching Toby's chest rise and fall. The moon rose high and full, bathing the ghost town in spectral light. Then the voice came. "Silas Thorne!" It boomed from the end of the street, amplified by the canyon walls. Addie peeked through a crack in the shutter. A line of men on horseback stood at the edge of town. At their center was a man in a pristine white duster, a silver star gleaming on his chest. The fake marshal. "We know you're in there." The man shouted, "Give us the girl and the paper, and you can walk away. We have nitrogen monoxide quarrel with you, rancher." Silence from the ruins. "Have it your way," the man yelled. He raised his hand. "Burn it out." The riders spurred their horses forward, torches flaring to life in their hands. They charged down the main street, yelling like demons. Crack! A shot rang out from the roof of the hotel. The lead rider was punched out of his saddle, his torch cartwheeling into the dirt. Crack, crack, 2 more shots, rapid and precise. Another rider fell. A horse screamed. "Take cover," the marshal screamed. The riders scattered, diving behind water troughs and crumbling walls. Gunfire erupted, tearing into the silence. The night turned into a chaotic strobing of muzzle flashes. Addie flinched as bullets thudded into the adobe walls outside. She kept her eyes trained on the door. Silas was a ghost. She saw flashes of him, a shadow on the roof, a silhouette in a window. He moved constantly, firing, relocating, firing again. He was holding off 20 men single-handedly, but they were flanking him. She saw 3 men creeping through the alleyway, heading toward the adobe hut. They were bypassing Silas. Addie's heart hammered against her ribs. She leveled the Winchester at the door. The wood splintered as a boot kicked it in. A man burst through, a pistol in his hand. Addie didn't hesitate. She pulled the trigger. The recoil slammed into her shoulder. The man flew backward, clutching his chest. A second man dived through the opening, rolling and firing. The bullet shattered a clay pot next to Addie's head. She worked the lever, ejected the shell, and fired again. He crumpled. The third man hesitated in the doorway, seeing his comrades down. He locked eyes with Addie, a girl with wild hair and a face like a fury. "Come on!" she screamed at him, cycling the action. He turned and ran. Outside, the battle was intensifying. The posse had set fire to the livery stable. The flames were roaring, casting erratic orange light over the town. "Flush him out!" The marshal screamed. Addie heard a massive crash, the hotel balcony collapsing. "Silas!" she screamed. She couldn't stay here. She couldn't hide while he died. "Nita," Addie said, turning to the old woman, Watch him. Use this if you have to." She handed the Colt revolver to the medicine woman. Nita took it, her eyes gleaming. "Go. Be the fire." Addie kicked the barricade aside and sprinted out the back door. She moved through the shadows, circling around the burning stable. She saw Silas. He was pinned down behind a water trough in the center of the square. 5 men were advancing on him, firing suppressive rounds. He was out of ammo. She saw him trying to reload his peacemaker, but the wood around him was disintegrating under the hail of lead. Addie climbed a pile of rubble, gaining the high ground. She took a breath, steadied the rifle on a broken beam, and exhaled. Bang! One of the advancing men dropped. The others spun around, confused. "Sniper!" Bang! Another man went down, clutching his leg. "It's the girl," someone shouted. Silas used the distraction. He rose up, the peacemaker singing. Bam! Bam! 3 shots, 3 men down. The remaining posse members broke. Their morale shattered by the crossfire and the seeming invincibility of their prey, they scrambled for their horses. "Retreat!" The marshal screamed, wheeling his horse around. "Pull back!" They thundered out of town, leaving their dead and wounded in the dust. Silence returned to San Perdido, heavier than before, punctuated only by the crackle of the burning stable. Addie scrambled down the rubble and ran to the water trough. Silas was slumped against the wood, clutching his side. Blood was seeping between his fingers. "Silas!" She fell to her knees beside him. "I'm all right," he grunted, his face pale. "Just a scratch." "Missed the vitals." "You're bleeding," she cried, tearing a strip from her shirt to bind the wound. "I've had worse shaving." He managed a weak smile. You ... You shoot straight, Kincaid. "I had a good teacher," she said, her voice thick with emotion. They helped each other back to the adobe hut. Inside, the air was still and heavy. Nita was standing over Toby. The boy was sleeping peacefully, his breathing deep and even. The fever had broken. "He will live," Nita said, wiping her hands on a cloth. Addie let out a sob of relief, collapsing against the wall. Silas slid down beside her, groaning as his wound stretched. They sat there for a long time, watching the firelight flicker. They were alive. Against all odds, they were alive. "This isn't over," Silas said quietly, breaking the silence. "Blanton won't stop. He can't afford to." "I know," Addie said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the letter. "But now we know what he's afraid of." She looked at Silas. "We have the deed, we have the water, and we have a witness." "A witness?" Silas asked. "You," Addie said. "And me. And Toby. We're going to take this to the governor. We're going to take this to the newspapers in the East. We're going to make so much noise that Blanton won't be able to bury us without burying himself." Silas looked at her, and for the first time, Addie saw something new in his eyes. "Not just respect, hope. That's a war, Addie," he said. "A different kind of war. Are you with me?" she asked, holding out her hand. Silas looked at her hand, small, calloused, dirt-stained. He took it in his own, his grip strong and warm. "I promised your pa I'd look out for you," he said. "Seems to me I am doing a piss-poor job of it if I let you fight the U.S. Senate alone." "Only if you promise," Silas said, echoing the words that had started it all. "That next time I get to drive." Addie laughed, a genuine, weary laugh. "Deal." Just then, the door creaked open. They both froze, hands going to their weapons. But it wasn't the posse. It wasn't a gunman. Standing in the doorway was a man in a dusty suit, holding a derby hat. He looked terrified. He looked familiar. It was the clerk from the bank in Silver Creek. "Don't shoot," he squeaked, raising his hands. "Please, I followed the posse. I hid. What do you want?" Silas growled, trying to stand. "The senator," the clerk stammered, eyes darting to the letter in Addie's hand. He emptied the accounts. "He's not just coming for the water, Miss Kincaid. He's coming to burn the records." He's coming to erase the town. Addie stood up, the fatigue vanishing. When? Tomorrow, the clerk whispered. He's bringing the cavalry. The real cavalry. He told them there's an Apache uprising led by renegades. Silas and Addie exchanged a look. The stakes had just shifted. It wasn't just about the ranch anymore. It was about the whole valley. Then we don't go to the governor, Silas said, clicking the cylinder of his revolver back into place. We go to Silver Creek. Addie grabbed her Winchester. She looked at Toby, sleeping soundly, then at Nita, who nodded solemnly. Keep him safe, Addie told the old woman. The spirits watch him, Nita said. Go, the storm is coming. Addie walked to the door, stepping out into the cool pre-dawn air. The sun was just beginning to crest the horizon, painting the sky in hues of violent orange and blood red. Silas stepped up beside her, limping slightly, but standing tall. Ready? He asked. Addie looked at the sunrise. She thought of her father. She thought of the land. She thought of the fight ahead. Let's ride, she said. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.